Why would we ever want to use a Waveshaper? The answer is control. So let's take a look at a few situations where that might be useful. So if you've ever used any type of saturation or distortion before, like for example this one in Ableton, this saturator, you'll notice that you have this kind of curve that will affect the sound in various ways, right? This is called the transfer curve. And when we increase the drive, it starts changing the output relative to the input, and that's exactly what a Waveshaper does. So this exact curve we can actually recreate inside of a Waveshaper. But the advantage to using a Waveshaper is that we have a lot more control over the exact curves and the exact operations that are in place with the output relative to the input. So if you've never seen a Waveshaper before, a fantastic free one is called the Melda Waveshaper, the M Waveshaper. And this is exactly what it looks like. Now I do like to set up a few of these options from the default preset before we get started. The first one is to increase the dry wet percentage all the way to wet. The second one, I like to have the mode on squared because apparently that mode is what's most accurately reflected in the changes that we make on the graph. The last thing is that I'm going to change the automatic gain control to be on so that anytime we make big changes in the amount of distortion, it will, adjust the gain output to be the same as the input, which is really helpful. So this transfer curve is the same thing that we're looking at here in the saturator. But the difference is that we can add a bunch of points on this graph and change how it sounds. So if we have a really simple sine wave like this, and then we increase, say, this control, it starts to sound a bit more like the classic saturation that we're all used to. Now on the saturator, for example, you'll notice that if we change from analog clip to say a medium curve or a hard curve, that curve there gets steeper and steeper. And we can actually mimic this exact effect if we just drag a point over. So if I double click here and I add a new point, if I drag this over and start to make it steeper and steeper, but the advantage here is that we can actually drag this point in between and really get more interesting and complex types of distortion, which gives us more interesting and complex types of sounds. So if I play a note here, you can see that this is our F sine wave. And if we start adding in some distortion, it starts bending the wave up and down in different ways, which adds different harmonics. One thing to note too is that this line that goes from the bottom left corner to the top right hand corner, anytime it's on this line means that the audio is unchanged. So that means that we can actually change different parts of the waveform and leave other things untouched, which is something that isn't possible with just your standard type of saturation. The fantastic part about using wave shaping is that you can treat the transient of the kick differently to the body. So you can distort them differently if you like. So for example, if I add a point right here at the bottom and I bring it over, it'll start to isolate the transient, almost like a noise gate. Which means that this area, we can focus on changing different aspects of the transient, right? So if I add a point right here and we start kind of messing around with where it is on the graph, we can start making that transient sort of non-linear. And you can see that there's kind of a diagonal thing right here happening, which is adding kind of a cool curve here. So if I drag this back, get some really, really nice distortion going on. Another really great way to use this is on a drums bus, okay? So if we had the drums like this, and one thing I love to do is just push that. Just find that sweet spot where you really like it. But it actually gets better because one thing you can do is kind of inject some noise and make it really kind of industrial sounding. So if I add a point here and I just bring up like this silent part right here, check out what happens. You can just add in almost some tones into your kick and some of the stuff that's happening inside of the loop. And it's so much fun to use. Another really, really amazing thing you can do with a Waveshaper is to introduce some filtering before and after the Waveshaper. So that way it applies the distortion to certain parts of the spectrum without creating all of these insane, like, harsh resonances. And this is something that you'll find a lot with like acid type loops and type bass sounds and things like that. So what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna add in an EQ before the Waveshaper here, and I'm just gonna create a peak somewhere. So like, let's say somewhere like right here. I'm gonna highlight the EQ and the Waveshaper, put that into a group, and then I'm gonna copy or duplicate this EQ. And a cool thing about the Ableton EQ is that you can actually change the scale from 100% to minus 100%, which means that it's gonna do the exact opposite thing that it's doing in the first place. So we're adding some EQ, we're doing the wave shaping, and then we're taking it back away. Now, just to really demonstrate what's happening here, I'm gonna change this waveform to actually just be a sawtooth here. So we get plenty of those harmonics that we can work with here. What I'm gonna do next is I'm gonna open up the macros, and I wanna be able to move the frequencies of the pre and the post EQs at the same time. So I'm just going to map the frequencies to macro 1. And then I'm gonna do the exact same thing with the Q factor, basically how tight or how resonant it is. Okay, so now we can change both of these at the same time, which is gonna be really, really useful. So now if we kind of add some distortion in there and we move the frequencies around, we get some really cool sounds. Now, what I like to do is add in envelope follower, and this is a Max for Live device inside of Ableton. And I'm just gonna have it listen to our operator, our main synth here, just following that envelope, but we're gonna map it to the frequency here so that it's going to have a bit of an envelope, which is gonna be really fun. And then if we change the depth a little bit, we can start having some fun with this distortion here. One thing to note here too is that if you right click inside of the Waveshaper, you get access to all these different types of curves, which really start to get crazy. Okay, so if I add in, like, say the sine waves here, it's gonna create a series of sine waves. They're sort of superimposed on top of our original synth waveform here. And you can change the amount of sine waves here. So you get some really, really wild sounds. Another cool one that you can mess around with too is this stairs function, which kind of operates like a bit reducer or bit reduction. And you can change where in the cycle you want to apply different levels of the bit reduction, which is pretty mind-blowing. And you can also play around with changing the type of curve it is as well. So if we didn't use a bell curve here, we can actually just use one filter. And change the depth here. So there's lots of different creative options that we can take here. Another really fun way to use it is actually on 808s when you want to just dirty them up, but you want to be a little bit more creative with how you dirty them up instead of just using a bog standard saturator. So I just have like a very, very basic waveform here in an operator with a little pitch envelope on it. You can start having some fun with this. This one works especially well when you just kind of have the dry wet at like 50% and you start changing some of these parameters and adjusting the type of distortion that you're getting. Then of course we could add in like a filter on top of that. So instead of having all these presets that are predetermined for, the types of curves that you can go for, you can draw in your own curves and create your own types of distortions. And it's really, really helpful for things that need lots of harmonics. And this is all in addition to the fact that you can have different types of distortion on different aspects of the sound. And if you do have any questions about the way that the Waveshaper works, or you just want a little bit of help wrapping your mind around what's happening behind the scenes, leave us a comment down below and we'd be happy to respond. And until next time, happy music making. We'll see you in the next video. Take care. Peace.